Hi, I'm attorney Gregory Dell here with Stephen Jessup. And Stephen, today we're going to talk about long-term disability insurance claims for consultants. And specifically, we're talking about this category of consultants known as management or strategic consultants. And these are the consultants that are working for companies like McKinsey & Company, Boston Consulting Group, Bain Capital, Price Waterhouse, Deloitte. There's a lot of them. And they're big companies, and they're high level, very skilled, top of their class type employees, very competitive work environment. And before we went on, we were talking about how many different consultants we've represented from all of these, different companies, and that they all have different policies. So it's impossible in this video to get into the nuances of each of those disability policies. But I want to talk about how you present this type of occupation as a management or strategic consultant to a disability carrier, because of the fact that the disability carrier is just going to look up consultant. And consultant is a broad term. I mean, there's hundreds of different types of consultants, but strategic and management consultants is very high level. So how do you go about presenting that occupation to a disability insurance company?
Well, I think one of the big things, like you said, is first to know how they're going to look at it. Well, I think consultant is a job title that people understand, okay, a consultant, but they actually don't know what it really is. And I think most of the time the insurance company is going to look at just the physical demand level and try to pigeonhole it as typically some type of sedentary job. So the important thing is with consulting, like medical professions and even legal professions, is it can be any myriad in industry, right? So this idea of what a consultant does and going in and, for their client, a business, trying to figure out how to make it more efficient, where you can implement new strategies to help the business grow, things like that. But it can be in a plethora. I mean, pretty much any industry you think of, this consultant could specialize in that particular area. So you first have to know what they specialize in. And then it's a matter of crafting, a day in the life type thing. Like you were mentioning when we were speaking about this, how a lot of times, they have an office. They have offices in most of the major cities in the United States, these companies. But it's very rare that the person is in it more than one day a week, because they're on job sites. They're meeting with clients all the time. So it's first understanding how the insurance company is going to try to classify their job. And then when we take a look at it, determining what industry they work in with consulting, because it is very highly specialized to that. And then it's engineering it from there. I have found that in a lot of these companies, the job descriptions for these management consultants are actually pretty detailed as to what it is they're supposed to do and what the job entails. So it's making sure that the insurance company is going to pay attention to that. And the vast majority of these cases that we do get, you see, unfortunately, most of the time these people only have that employer-provided policy. You do see privately purchased ones, but generally speaking, it's an employer-provided policy. So you really have to play against that, idea of a national economy standard in the way the job's done. So it's very, very nuanced. You can't treat them all the same, just like you can't treat every lawyer the same in the type of area of law they practice, and same with doctors. So it's understanding the real nuts and bolts of the specialty of the client.
Right, and you touched upon that national economy standard. So the disability carrier that tries to say, oh, your client's a consultant, they can sit for 6 hours a day, that's their job, no problem. But we know from having represented so many management consultants that it's far more than that, because you have, for the most part, when you're one of the top 20 consulting firms, you're usually consulting for the Fortune 1000 companies, which are the world's biggest companies. And these companies who can get great talent are saying, look, we need help with a strategy. We need help with a management process. And they're reaching out to an outside company to say, come into our company and either tell us how to do something better or implement our new strategy for us, because we need help. Now, if you're that consultant, you got to be on your game. You got to be like better than everybody, because you're not with the company. You're outside, and you don't have the opportunity to say, I don't feel well today, or I can come, but I need to take a break every 15 minutes to go lay down. Or you can't go in there and not look healthy or not be on your game and not all be all cognitively there, because they're going to be like, this is the reason why we went outside. We need guidance. We don't have the time for you to be here one day, not here another, and not be on your A game. So the disability carriers always minimize that, and they don't take into consideration how how demanding this job is, and how much time deadlines there are, and how much travel there is, and all the different things. Because now, when you're a consultant, you come into someone else's business. You don't know it like, oh, I've been doing this for years. You got to learn everything they're doing and review hundreds and hundreds of different things and interview employees. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And like we were discussing before, it's in every industry. Everything, from agricultural to finance to operational management to how Amazon runs their warehouses to what Microsoft is doing internally. It's all over the place. It's a tremendous job that's very demanding. So I think the first most important point in this video is that you really need to present your occupation as detailed as possible and as and super specific, and use as many examples as you can as to what you do, because if not, your occupation is going to be minimized 100%. Not only is it going to be minimized, Steve, you know that Voc Rehab, how many sentences is their report going to be when they define the occupation? Usually.
Oh, generally speaking, if you get 3 sentences out of it, that's a lot. Outside of maybe cut and pasting some generic job description, ultimately, even sometimes when they do list out all of the job duties, and even in denial letters, we'll see they'll list out all the duties a person has, but then they say, your job is sedentary in the national economy. This is sedentary. We think you can do sedentary, so you should be able to do the rest. It's the same argument a lot of times we'll make as a lawyer. I always say, my job's sedentary according to the Department of Labor. I sit at a desk. But if being a warm body and a desk was how I made a living, life would be great. That's not the case. It's the cognitive demands, of the job, and these people do have that, plus the fact that they're, like you said, always out interacting with clients. And in business, time is money. Everything is about money. So they are hiring someone to eventually, they're spending money to make money,
right.
And hoping that this person is going to come in and be able to implement these changes that will make things run smoothly. We're recording this during, the COVID era, and right now you can see how so many companies had to do an about face in the way and nature in which they do business to adjust to these times to continue to try to make profits. So this is that type of job where, time is very much of the essence, and in a lot of ways, you're going into large, like you said, Fortune 1000 style companies. You are selling yourself in so many ways to get that business and to instill the trust that this company will listen to what your guidelines are. So like you said, you can't be taking time off, you can't be distracted, you can't look unhealthy. It is a very, very highly competitive, nonstop type A go business.
So what I want to talk about that we see a lot with the consultants is that most of the consultants are, obviously they're employed by their employer and they work for third-party companies. And it's not like they're getting a piece of a deal or something like that. So they're usually on a salary, and they'll get a year-end bonus or something based upon how the company overall performs. But what happens is, and this is where the point I'm trying to get to, is that planning is so important, because more often than not, we represent a consultant who's been suffering with a chronic medical condition for 6 months to 2 years. And they've been working through the condition, and their income has probably even gone up. It doesn't go down. Maybe the 1 year before the company did good, they got a better bonus. They might have had a little bit of a salary increase, something like that. And now they say, I can't do it anymore. But yet when you look at what they've done and you look at their salary, and it's very hard for these management consultants to show exactly it's not like a CPT. It's not like a doctor who said I did 3 surgeries Tuesday and 4 Thursday. It's more, no, I was on this project for 3 weeks, 6 months, whatever. So how do you go about presenting the claim at that point to say, this claimant was done and this is why this was the date of disability? How do you support that?
Well, it can be real tough, especially since, like you said, if they are not necessarily, having poor work performance evaluations, missing dramatic amount of work, losing salary, it's this thing that, you have the diagnosis, but you're able to work with it, so it's not meeting this idea of a legal disability under a policy. So it is very nuanced, and that can be very tricky and hard. And some of the clients I've represented, whether that is strategically taking of, time off, right, using PTO and things like that, especially when you have a situation where you don't see that typical drop in earnings and there aren't poor work performance, because this person is still getting the job done. They're just spending twice as much time to do it. So whether it's strategic use of, PTO, taking some time off to start setting this pattern of person, they were taking breaks, they were trying to rest and recover, making sure during that time that they are meeting with the doctors to document that the doctor is putting in the records how the condition is impacting the person's ability to work. So there does take quite a bit of planning. I mean, you have to, in our capacity with that, when someone contacts us in this profession thinking, hey, I want to file, we're their consultant as to, you're not making stuff up, but it's the way you have to present it to the insurance company, especially given the fact, like we said, the majority of these people have employer-provided policies, and the body of law or ERISA that governs these is not going to be overly beneficial or favorable to them. And even a lot of times these companies, these major consulting firms, don't have great policies. I've represented people who work for Pricewaterhouse, KPMG, and the policies aren't great. Right now I'm in the process of working an appeal for a young lady who, they denied her after 24 months when they all of a sudden said you can do any other occupation. So they're going to find ways to constantly deny because these are high wage earners, and that means the benefits are going to be high. So you really have to kind of dissect and plan ahead of time. So if someone was thinking about, hey, this medically speaking, I'm having a really hard time doing this, it's become very problematic, it's very smart to contact an attorney early on, even months and months before you're thinking about maybe having to call it a day, so you can start setting that roadmap and showing to an insurance company what changed or where the problems kind of began to justify. If you stop cold turkey, the likelihood of a denial is pretty high in these cases.
And then if you're in that situation, because we always get the other side of the scenario where they did work through their condition for 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, it comes down to credibility. And the credibility is challenged by the disability carrier saying, okay, we see your diagnosis, but we got you under video surveillance. We looked at your social media profiles. We asked you to submit some loan documents you may have requested lately where they asked if you had any sicknesses or injury or anything like that. And they're looking for one little piece of information that shows some inconsistency with what you're saying. And if they have that, they're not going to believe anything that you say. And they will follow you around because it is done daily. So, that's a big issue. And then if they get any inconsistent statement from your treating doctor, because they're usually going to call the treating doctor, and it's very important for your treating doctors to be prepared. And the treating doctors have to understand the occupational duties of what you're doing as a consultant. And more often than not, they don't. So when we're representing a claimant, we educate our clients as to how you need to speak to your doctor, what needs to be in the medical records, and also prepping the doctor to basically know what to expect if they get a phone call. More often than not, we even say, tell them not to speak to the doctor, ask them to send questions in writing. We'll work back and forth with the doctors and we'll assist in that process so that we can make sure there is zero inconsistencies that happen and that the doctors know the full information. Because how often do you see the doctor, they're busy, they get a letter or they don't speak to the doctor, and the in-house doctor for the insurance company sends a letter and says, well, I reviewed the records, and if I don't get your response, I'll find that you agree with my position. And sometimes doctor doesn't even reply, and the claimant has no idea, and then they end up in a denial, which totally could have been avoided. So there's so many issues with this, and so many of the big carriers, whether it's Unum, Hartford, MetLife, Cigna, New York Life, that insure these world's biggest management consulting firms, and we've seen them all. What we recommend you do is if you have a claim, no matter what stage you're at, contact Stephen or myself. We're going to provide you with an initial free phone consultation to let you know what we think of your claim and how we could help you with your claim. The other thing is take a look, search up your company on our website and take a look at all the information we have. We have reviews from other people that have had claims just like yours that you'd find helpful. We've answered lots of questions specific to your company. And we've also summarized lots of lawsuits, and in some cases, hundreds of lawsuits we've summarized where you get the flavor for how these companies operate and you start to see this pattern. And it is a pattern. It happens all the time. It's been going on for 30 years. It's not new. The advantage is that you become educated in what's going on and you learn how to avoid these situations and you have a better understanding as to how you can help yourself in this situation, how us as lawyers can guide you to get your benefits approved. And that's what our job is here, is to help you maximize the benefits under your policy and do whatever we can to get your benefits paid. So we help clients all over the country. We welcome the opportunity for you to call us, and we'll be here when you need us in the future.